guys, welcome back. Today we're going to read chapters 10 through 15 of The Birthday Ball by Lois Lowry. So we're going to do a little bit of a longer reading today, so I might stop somewhere in the middle so we can take a break, go to the bathroom, just kind of think about the story, make some predictions or something like that as you go. So let's start with chapter 10, titled Dinner Conversation. Dinner in the castle was always a tedious meal, with many courses served one after another, and the king, queen, and the princess seated so far from one another at the long mahogany table that it was difficult for them to converse. Not that it mattered. The queen's hearing was so poor that she misunderstood most of what was said, and the king was so preoccupied with thoughts of butterflies that he didn't care. But on this evening, the second day after she had become a pupil in disguise at the village school, and 4 days before her birthday ball, the princess wanted to make a request of her parents. "Father," the princess said, but he didn't look up. "Mother?" But the queen continued to sip at her soup and made no reply. The princess gestured to the serving girl who stood near her chair. It was the alto, one of the 3 identical kitchen maids who sang together so beautifully in the kitchen. "Yes, miss," the serving girl curtsied. The princess, hearing the deep timbre of the serving girl's voice, which she had never noticed before, remembered what Tess had told her about the music in the kitchen. "Are you the ones who sings?" the princess asked. The serving girl blushed. "Yes, miss, but only in the kitchen. Never above stairs, I promise." "And those 2, are they the ones who sing with you? My chambermaid told me." The other 2 sisters looked up. One stood at the far end of the table behind the king, and the other behind the queen at the opposite end. They noticed that the princess had pointed them out and looked nervous. "Yes, miss. More soup, miss? I can ring for the pulley boy to send some, or there's pheasant pie next, quite lovely." "Oh no, I've had quite enough soup. I would like you to do something though." "Yes, miss?" "I would like you to converse with my parents, but I can't seem to get their attention. Would you and the others, are they your sisters, by the way?" "Yes, miss. Triplets we are, all 3 of us, born together in a whoosh, 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 our ma said, such a surprise, but too many to feed, so now we're serving maids and take our meals for free." "I was asking about singing. Is it true what my chambermaid told me, that you sing?" "Yes, miss, it is that." "Well, would you and your sisters please sing something rousing, an attention-getting song?" The serving girl looked stricken. "Oh, miss, it simply ain't allowed, never, 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 to sing above stairs." "Nonsense, I order it. Let me hear a first note." Trembling, the girl hummed a note. Even though it was a small, frightened hum, the princess could hear the rich tone of her voice. "Louder, please." The other 2 serving girls looked over in surprise, and then each one hummed in harmony. That sounded terrible. Their voices together blended into an exquisite sound. The king and queen, looking quite startled, both put down their soup spoons. "It's all right. I've given them permission. I ordered them to do it," the princess called to her parents in explanation. "What?" the queen asked. "They've been given permissions? They've been given persimmons?" "Permission," the king explained loudly. "Our daughter, Permission, ordered them." "I see," the queen replied, still confused. "Once more," the princess said to the serving girls, "move closer together." Timidly, the 3 girls moved to stand in a row. They hummed the 3-part harmony once again. "Do you do words?" the princess asked, "or just hums?" "Oh, all sorts of words, miss. Tra-las and such as well." One of the sopranos giggled. "Fiddle-de-fees, on occasion," she said. "I'd like you to compose a song about the birthday ball. Maybe it could be a kind of, well, a celebration song." "We could do a happy birthday to you, miss. We could do it all the time in the kitchen. It's always somebody's birthday. Cook's last Thursday." The princess frowned. "No, that's too ordinary. I'd like an original celebrity song." "Yes, miss. We'll practice one down in the scullery. Shall I call for the pheasant pie now?" "Oh, I suppose so. Sing for it, though." The 3 serving girls grinned. They moved to the bell rope, which alerted the pulley boy, and one of the girls pulled on it. Then they opened the door in the wall and sang down to the kitchen. "Pheasant pie! Pheasant pie! Pheasant pie!" From below, echoing up through the passageway carved through 3 floors of thick stone, a baritone replied in song, "Pheasant pie!" And with the pulley boy's voice, they could hear a small staccato accompaniment, the elderly serving boy tapping in time on the stone wall with a heavy fork. The rope moved, and dinner ascended. Still singing "Pheasant pie," the 3 girls served it, a plateful apiece, with some asparagus, and spooned some hollandaise on top. "Sauce, sauce, sauce," they sang in chorus. "Now that I have your attention, Mother and Father, I would like to talk about the birthday ball," the princess said as the plates were served. Move closer so that I can hear you," the queen suggested, and then she turned to her husband. "You too, dear. Let's sit side by side and discuss the birthday ball." "Girls," she said, turning to the three serving maids, who curtsied one by one in reply, "move our plates and forks and everything here together. Then if you would, please hum lightly while we finish our dinner. It soothes my nerves and makes the meal seem festive." "The entire village?" the queen asked, disconcerted. This is the next part of this chapter. "To the birthday ball? Did I hear you correctly?" "Yes, please, Mother, I'd like that." Princess Patricia Priscilla touched the tip of her silver fork to the pale yellow sauce. "The villagers are all poor peasants, and they have never been to a ball. Think how they'd enjoy it." "Oh, I don't know, the queen murmured. "It's so not done. Father, what do you think?" The king had begun to tire of talk about the ball, and his mind had wandered off to contemplate rare butterflies. He frowned. "What do I think? About what? I don't know. No idea. Not a clue." "Might I invite the villagers to my birthday ball?" the princess asked impatiently. Villagers, ball, whatever. The king's mind was on the rare butterfly that was missing from his collection. Perhaps if he arranged a jungle excursion. "We would have to order them to wash first," the queen mused. "Peasants are clean, Mother. Truly they are." The princess took a small bite of asparagus. "But of course we could mention bathing in the invitation if you think we should." "Mention what? What was that? Bathing? Oh, I don't think so, dear. There was a terrible sport in the old days called bear baiting. Your father outlawed it years ago." Sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Okay. "Bathing, Mother. We could say that the invitation is for all well-bathed villagers." The princess enunciated clearly. "Yes, of course. Bathing," the queen nodded. "I'd hope they wouldn't bring gifts, though, dear. Think what they might bring. Piglets, I'm afraid. Things like that." "We would tell them gifts aren't necessary, Mother. In fact, the suitors will bring gifts, of course." "Oh my, I make myself nervous and excited just thinking about what incredible gifts the suitors might bring," the queen shivered. The princess did not want to think about it or talk about suitors. "In fact," she went on, "I would like to give gifts to the villagers." "Eh? What was that? Gifts? Give gives? Give gloves? Lift clothes? Oh dear, I can't think of whatever you are talking about." "Father," the princess turned to the king, "may I have your permission to give gifts to the villagers?" "Gifts. Permission. Yes, whatever. I'll skip dessert." The king took his linen monogrammed napkin from his lap and gestured to the serving girls, who hurried to the table to remove his plate. Monogrammed means that he has his initials in his name, like sewn onto his what was it? His napkin. I'm sorry, his napkin. Yes. So in case you didn't know what monogrammed means. The queen wiped her lips daintily with her own napkin and then nodded to one of the triplets. "Do hum a bit more," she said, "or sing. I do enjoy that." Holding a tray with the waiting dessert dishes on it, the alto sang, "Apricot ice cream," and the other girls joined in, "Apricot ice cream." I don't know if I was doing an alto voice there, but sorry, work with me. "Apricot ice cream." The king changed his mind. "Changed my mind. Dessert, after all." The three serving girls continued singing as they served the ice cream and then left the dining chamber carrying trays of empty plates and descended the stairs. Their harmony grew fainter as they walked to the kitchen. From far below in the antechamber to the kitchen, The sound echoing through the pulley passage, the princess heard the pulley boy join in with his deep, rich baritone. I do hope Tess is down there hearing that, the princess thought, thinking of the freckled chambermaid. Then she heard a sweet female voice join in and knew that Tess was right there in the middle of the music. All right, chapter 11, the conjoint counts. And we kind of learned a little bit about these dudes earlier on, so let's read a little bit more about the conjoint counts. When the conjoint counts were born and were revealed to be joined at the middle, which was quite astonishing to their parents, a royal decree was issued almost immediately. It seemed fairly simple, not designed to cause hardship. Everything in the domain was to become plural in name. The word cow, a word commonly used in the area because there were many farms, was now to be cows. It was sometimes difficult for the peasants. They were accustomed to saying, "Do your lessons," or "Pull up your trousers," but they had a hard time remembering to say, "Go milk the cows," when the family only owned one. Now, instead of weeding the garden, they had to weed the gardens, even though they were tending only a small patch of carrots and potatoes. And when a peasant mother told her little ones, "Go and kiss your granny," she was required to say, "Go and kiss your grannies," which confused the tots and made them cry often and refuse their supper. Even now, though years had passed since the decree, and though the parents of the conjoint counts were long dead, the language of the domain continued to make use of the superfluous plural. No one was ever quite certain what verb to employ. And speaking of a single tree, for example, should one say, "The trees are large," or, "The trees is large," or "The trees are large"? Small children had trouble learning to talk. It was a nuisance and a bother, sometimes worse, but it was the law of the domain. Count Colin and Count Cuthbert were adults now, and ruled the domain in which they lived. But although they were joined at the middle, always had been, always would be, it did not make them the best of friends. They agreed on only one thing, and that was jokes. They both laughed uproariously at bathroom jokes, or jokes involving underwear. Though as soon as they finished laughing, they argued about who could tell a joke better, and sometimes made rude noises at each other with their lips, and said, "Yeah, yeah," and "I'm rubber, you're glue, everything you say bounces off me and sticks to you," in a sing-song, whiny voice. They had a particular annoying prank that they played on each other. One would wait until his brother's face was turned toward his own, and then belch loudly at it and cry, "Gotcha!" The belched at one would invariably respond with a full-scale wedgie. They bickered constantly. If Colin wanted to walk to the left, Cuthbert insisted that right was the way to go, so they pulled at each other and argued. Their clothing was of course specially made, with 4 arms and 4 legs, and 2 neck holes and a very wide waist, called of course a waists, to accommodate them both. But if Colin decided to wear the blue shirt, Cuthbert said no, the brown. They fought and had even torn some suits to shreds. Once they had decided to be naked for an entire day because they couldn't agree on what to wear. If Cuthbert wanted to sleep, Colin decided not only to stay awake, but to play his saxophones. Of course he played only one, but he spoke of it as required in the plural. Fortissimo, so that the blares kept his brother awake and angry. Colin was squeamish about bugs, so Cuthbert collected them and kept the pockets on his sides of their specially made trousers filled with crickets and beetles and things that squirmed and occasionally made noises. Cuthbert had grown what he called beards. Of course it was only one beard, and he thought it was quite handsome. Colin was not only clean-shaven but very ticklish, and his brother's beard constantly brushed against his neck with its wiry curling ends and making him shriek. When they attended church, as regulars generally do, they were a distraction for the populace. When Colin wanted to kneel, Cuthbert wanted to stand. If Cuthbert decided to sing a hymn, or hymns, as it was called, it was at the very moment that Colin felt compelled to pray. With their constant pulling and tugging and shrieking and bickering, their poking and slapping and name-calling, the most solemn ceremonies were chaotic. And even an entire order of contemplative nuns had complained that they lost their ability to concentrate if the conjoint counts were in the congregation. But like the Duke of Dyspepsia and the Prince of Pustula, Pustula, the Counts of Coagulatia, were immensely wealthy and overwhelmingly powerful. No one would change their behavior or complain about it. Coagulatia. It was at an evensong service that those who had gathered in the cathedral noticed a change. The counts, sitting together as they always did, since there was no other way for them to sit, were relatively peaceful throughout the service. They knelt together, sang together, and even, the villagers noticed, because it was not the usual thing or proper thing in church, giggled loudly from time to time as if they had a secret. "Something has happened to the Conjoint counts," people murmured. "Wonder what?" The murmurs reached the castle. "What has happened to the Conjoint counts?" was asked again and again, first of the guards at the portcullis, then by the food delivery man with a crate of aubergines at the kitchen door, and once by a small child who wandered through the courtyard with his fingers in his mouth, or mouths, as they had been taught to say, so that the question came out slurping and moist. "What has happened to the Conjoint counts?" Finally the people were told. A royal proclamation was issued, with trumpets tootling and flower petals flung everywhere along the village lines. "The Conjoint counts have chosen a brides," was the announcement. The villagers wondered exactly what that meant and who the brides might be that would be willing to marry the pair of them, but no one dared to ask. And there's a break here. "I love her initials," Colin said with a wicked little laugh as they began to plan their journey to the neighboring domain where the birthday ball was being held for the princess. They were making a list of things to take. "Pee-pee, pee-pee-poo-poo," Cuthbert chortled. "I'm going to get new underwears and have it monogrammed like that." He began to write it on the list. Pee-pee was the initials. "No, you can't. I thought of it first." Colin slapped his brother's hand so that the pencil fell to the floor. Cuthbert pushed him. In no time they were back at it, shoving and poking as they always had, forgetting the brief friendship that their decision to marry the princess had forged. "I'm going to burp on you," Cuthbert said. "Big burp's on the way." He opened his mouth and belched at Colin, who, being attached, could not avoid it, though he turned his head away. "Gotcha! Smelled like our lunches, huh? "I'm going to tell her what a poopy pants you are," Colin said. Then she won't want to. But they both fell silent. If the princess didn't want to marry one of them, she couldn't marry the other. Suddenly they stopped jostling each other, picked up the pencil, went back to the list, and continued planning the journey and deciding what provisions they would need. Colin looked at what might have been written already, gave a hoarse chuckle, and poked Cuthbert in the ribs with his elbow. "Now what? Now where we're going, huh? Cuthbert poked him back. "Huh?" "Balls," Colin said. "Balls," Cuthbert echoed with a rude, gleeful laugh. For a moment they were quite peaceful together, thinking how amusing it would be to announce their presence by bellowing "balls" when they arrived, and then to explain their intentions to become Priscilla's husbands. Right. Chapter 12. The Initiation. The invitation. The invitation from the castle, elaborately decorated, arrived in the village on Thursday. It was delivered to each cottage and each farmhouse, and finally to the schoolhouse. The princess noticed with relief that the message boy, an old man who had been doing the same job for the castle for many, many years, he had been the one, almost 16 years before, to deliver the announcements of the birth of the princess, and 5 years before that, the marriage of the king and queen, did not recognize her in her peasant garb. He was old, and his eyesight was poor. He simply squinted into the schoolhouse, glanced around at the pupils all working at their desks, and then hobbled forward with his cane to deliver the rolled scroll to the schoolmaster. "From the castle," he said abruptly. There was no reason to avoid the word "sir" to a lowly village schoolmaster, and too, he was tired. He had delivered so many announcements over so many years, and now suffered from boredom, arthritis, and a trick knee. He also needed spectacles. "Thank you," the schoolmaster said in some surprise, but when he looked up, the message boy had already turned and hobbled out. He had several more deliveries to make and was eager to finish. "I wonder what this could be." The pupils all called out guesses. "Maybe a notice that you forgot to pay your rent," called Fred. "No, part of my salary for being schoolmaster is the room where I live," the schoolmaster explained. "Announcement of a traveling circus coming round," suggested Nell hopefully, for there had been one once, and she remembered all of it. the ringmaster in a bright red costume with gold buttons, a monkey wearing a hat, and a white dog that danced. Usually, the schoolmaster reminded them, fingering the rolled message, a traveling circus is announced by jesters who come cartwheeling through the village the day before selling tickets. Maybe it's an order to witness a whipping, was Mick's hope, for he was interested in violence always, so long as he was not on the receiving end. Excuse me. There had not been a public whipping in a long time, not since the day a very bad-tempered village woman had smashed all of her neighbor's best pots in a fit of anger after an argument about who made the best stew. It hadn't been much of a whipping either, just a few taps to remind her to hold her temper in check. The little orphan Liz scratched her mosquito bite, smeared now with lotion that the princess had provided. She leaned forward and tried to peer at the mysterious paper. Then she closed her eyes tight and held her breath, the ritual for making a wish. "Oh, I do hope a circus," she whispered. "I never once seen one." "It's an invitation," the princess said under her breath. She watched while the schoolmaster unrolled the message. Here's an illustration of the schoolmaster reading the message and the little girl that's talking to Princess Patricia. And the message says, "Birthday banquet and ball for the Princess Patricia Priscilla. Saturday night at the castle. Food, gifts, music, suitors. Villagers welcome. Please bathe," in parentheses. The schoolmaster held it up so that the children could see, and they called out the words. "What's a suitor, sir?" The schoolmaster explained the concept of suitors, and they all wrinkled their noses. "What's gifts?" asked Liz. So he explained gifts. None of the pupils had ever received a gift. Their eyes grew wide. "Blimey," said Nell, "that gives you something, and you don't got to work for it?" That's my attempt at an accent. "I expect it'll be just a small gift," the princess said. "I mean, because we're poor, miserable peasants and all. Perhaps just a small candy or a toy." "A candy? A toy?" the children shouted. "What's a toy?" asked little Liz. "When's Saturday?" asked Ben, who could never remember such things. "Day after tomorrow," everyone cried out in daylight. "Day after tomorrow." The princess lingered after school was dismissed for the day. She had begun to dread returning to the lonely castle, and so she volunteered to sweep the floor and arrange the books and papers in order. Tidying things, she glanced surreptitiously at the schoolmaster, who sat at his desk, correcting the spelling tests they had done that morning. He looked up at her. "Will you be attending the birthday ball, Pat?" he asked. She sighed. She knew that Saturday would mean the end of her schoolhouse life, the end of her days posing as a peasant. "Yes, sir," she said. "And you, sir?" she asked. "Will you be going and getting a gift?" "Blimey, I suppose you never got no gift before, sir." She made the observation slyly, knowing that the schoolmaster was really not a common peasant at all, because the chambermaid had told her of the high origins of Herr Goodman. She wondered if he would confess to her now who he was. But he did not. "No," he replied, "there have been no gifts in my life." She teased him a bit. "Ah, sir, surely your ma gave you something, a play horsey carved of wood?" His look was sad. "My ma died when I was just a small boy," he told her. "Oh, sir, a pity that. Was she killed like my ma by a wild dog?" "You once said a boar, Pat, and that it was your pa who died." "Oh, I did indeed, and it was that. A boar killed my pa. I forgot for a minute. A boar killed my pa, and my ma does laundry, and that's the truth." "My mother died after giving birth to my sister," the schoolmaster said. "And my little sister is gone as well. My pa sent her away, so I've lost them both." "Blimey, that was cruel of your pa." "I no longer think of him as pa. He disowned me when I went off to become a teacher. Too uppity, he said. Putting on airs, he called it." "But, sir," she caught herself. She'd almost revealed that she knew of his noble origins. Something stopped her. He looked to be sad. "I'm finished here, sir. I'll be off now." He nodded, looking down again at the spelling papers. She hoped that her careful misspellings looked real, and that he, for one more day, until the ball, which she so dreaded, would continue to think of her an uneducated girl, a humble peasant in need of his teaching. Outside the schoolhouse, the princess called to her waiting pet. She'd been feeding Delicious extra sardines so that the cat would not sadden the orphan by eating birds. Now she could see, as Delicious woke up and rolled over, in response to her call, that the additional rations were having an effect. The cat was developing quite a tummy. "Your size is ambitious, Delicious," she said, but her mind was really elsewhere, and the fun of her even wordplay was diminished. She walked slowly back to the castle, the cat at her heels, thinking about how the village world would be so lost to her after the ball. Briefly, too, she thought, with despair, about the impending arrival of the Suitors. And we're going to take a quick break right there, and we're going to come back and read Chapter 13. Okay, Chapter 13, The Kitchen. The huge kitchen and its anterooms were alive with bustle and noise. There was no music now, except for the quiet sounds from a pantry corner where the three serving girls, exempted from their regular duties, were working on the song they'd been commanded to prepare for the ball. Today it was the clank of kettles and the clatter of plates, the thunk of knives, the roar of the cooking fires, and the hurried footsteps of the many servants, all of it orchestrated by the barked commands of the cook. "You, pulley boy," she shouted. "Yes, cook?" The boy looked in front of the hallway where he always positioned himself near the pulley door. He was a tall boy with curly hair and bright blue eyes. "Take a helper and go bring in the pigeons. There's 200 of them waiting out by the back entrance, all of them with their necks fresh wrung." "Necks wrung, cook?" The pulley boy gulped. He liked birds, had even kept a few as pets back in the village before he took his job. "We can't eat 'em with their wings flapping now, can we?" she replied with a grin. "Well, no, I guess not," the pulley boy acknowledged, though to himself he was wondering why anyone had to eat them at all. If he had his way, he would not eat anything but carrots and beans and bread. Maybe a fish now and then. He didn't like the thought of poor creatures becoming food. If any living thing had to have its neck wrung, he wished it were the princess's large yellow cat, which tended to hide behind draperies, then leap out and scratch the servants. Luckily, the pulley boy rarely had to go above stairs, but he knew chambermaids with long scratches on their ankles from the claws of the cats. "Delicious, you are so capricious," the princess had been heard to say fondly, picking up the cat after it had attacked a footman one day. "Blimey, that critter's savage," one pudgy girl had complained, returning to the kitchen with blood on her stockings. "Too bad we can't roast and eat cats," the pulley boy thought as he looked around for something to help him bring in the birds. All of the regular kitchen staff was hard at work, chopping and simmering and parboiling and plucking. Some were counting pink salmon that were contained in a tub of water. One young chopping lad, an apprentice still, was doing nothing but truffles, mincing them into a large pile. Another had been assigned to peel asparagus and stood behind a mountain of green spears, hardly knowing where to begin. Others were polishing silverware from enormous deposits on a long table. The pulley boy was about to call on his little brother, who was playing with a marble near the bell wall, when a tall, freckled girl wearing a shabby dress under her apron volunteered shyly. "I could go with you," the girl said. "Get them goats on the spit," cook bellowed to the staff. "They have to cook all day and through the night." She turned back to the kitchen, and the elderly serving boy, who usually tended only pets, shuffled reluctantly over to help lift the large goats that would be roasted for the banquet. The pulley boy looked at the freckled, eager girl. He recognized her as the 17th chambermaid, the one who tended the princess and who sometimes, in the kitchen, joined in the singing with a sweet, clear voice. Then he looked up at his brother, who continued to roll his green marble back and forth on the floor. "I suppose he should stay in case a bell is pulled," he mused. "Though that girl, the princess, she's off for the day somewheres. She hasn't called for lunch all week, and I already sent the queen's lunch aloft, and the king is in his counting house, so I don't think—" "Your brother had better stay," the chambermaid said, "in case the butler pulls a bell cord or something." "Right then, come along." He gestured, and the girl followed him through the hall, chattering happily as they went. "Creamed pigeons she's making," she told him. "Can you believe it? For 200! And some of them villagers, not nobility. I lived in the village once, and I never heard of a creamed pigeon." "I remember you did." He pushed open the heavy door. "Remember I did what? Heard of a creamed pigeon? I never." No, I remember you lived in the village with your pa. I remember he beat you. Everyone knew. The chambermaid grew flustered. Well, he said I was a useless great gloop, and I suppose I was. But you went to school. I used to see you going to the schoolhouse and your pa yelling after you and throwing things sometimes. The chambermaid nodded. I did. I wanted to learn to read, and the schoolmaster taught me. He was very strict and rapped your knuckles if you didn't pay attention, but he taught me my letters and how to read. And now I'm reading the best book about a girl named Alice who has adventures you wouldn't believe. Maybe you could borrow it when I'm done. Look, here they are. We should load them in the barrel, I suppose. They had stopped on the, I'm sorry, I'm like a little bit tongue-tied right now. They had stopped at the large pile of dead pigeons. The boy picked one up and looked at its staring eyes. After a moment, he dropped it into the wooden wheelbarrow standing nearby. Then he sighed and reached for more. I can't read. Worked all my life since I was a tot. Never went to school, he said. Here, grab some. You said you'd help. Don't just stand there. Poor pidgeys. They look like something you'd feed the cat. Maybe with cream sauce, though. The chambermaid leaned over, filled her apron with limp birds, and walked to the wheelbarrow. My name's Tess, she told him, spilling the birds into it. I could teach you, pulley boy. Cream sauce? No, thanks. To read. You could do that? He scooped up another armful of birds. Then he nodded to her and blushed. I'm John, he said. Pastry, they could hear the cook shout in the kitchen. Clear some tables for rolling out the pastry. I could, the chambermaid said. It's easy. Look, A is first, all stiff and upright like this. She drew the letter with a stick in the ground beside the wheelbarrow. The pulley boy, his arms filled with pigeons, stared down at it. A is for Alice and that book I told you about. He dropped the pigeons onto the top of the pile that they had already made. Let me try it then, he said, and took the stick from her. Carefully, he made an A in the dirt. Nuts to be shelled, the cook called. Where's that boy went to get the pigeons? He could be shelling these pistachios. Quickly, they loaded the last of the limp birds and pushed the wheelbarrow toward the corridor. I'll show you B later, Tess whispered. B is for birthday. And for ball, she explained. Chapter 14, The Suitors. From 3 different directions they started out early Saturday morning as the sun was rising. Each suitor had an entourage of servants, horses, and a coach in which to ride, and long lines of bearers carrying trunks of clothing, toiletries, and trinkets. A hawk, soaring high on the cloudless morning, peering below, his keen eyes alert for rodents or snakes to descend on for breakfast, saw the processions from a great distance. From his place in the sky, they looked like scores of ants moving steadily toward a destination where they would all converge on some edible mound, perhaps the leavings of a peasant picnic. But the hawk, no stranger to humans and the complicated lives they led, knew exactly what and who these caravans were. Through the countryside they came. En route from the east, Duke Desmond of Dyspepsia lay back among the thick cushions in his carriage, snoring. In his sleep he scratched himself. His stomach grumbled noisily. From the side of his always open mouth, a bit of drool slid to the cushion and made a wet splosh. Surrounding his carriage rode 6 attendants on horseback, each one selected for superior eyesight. They swiveled their necks constantly, searching the landscape for anything that might create a reflection. Their entire duties were to make absolutely certain that no mirror, no looking glass, nothing of a reflective nature would ever be within range of Duke Desmond's vision. When they approached a lake, the attendants signaled the processions to a halt. 2 of them rode ahead and perceived that the lake was quite still, not a dark, stagnant pond, but rather a deep, serene pool of clear water. They cantered to the shore, urging their horses until their noses were at the edge, and in fact they leaned down to drink. Seated on the horses' backs, the attendants leaned forward in their saddles, looked at their own reflections in the water, and sighed. It would never do. Splashers, they called loudly back to the entourage. Summon the splashers. Upon hearing the summons, a troop of thirsty men wearing bathrobes trotted from the back of the procession, where they had been assigned to march to the edge of the lake. This was their moment, the time they trained for. They got into the position and in unison dropped their bathrobes, plunged naked into the water, and swam to their designated spots. Then with highly synchronized movements, they trained in a castle pool every morning. They splashed with their muscular arms, churning the water into a froth. The procession started up and passed the lake slowly. Duke Desmond, pillowed in his carriage, had woken at the stopping and starting, and he heard the noise. He raised a window shade, glanced outside, and saw nothing but a body of water, wild with waves, foam, and bubbles. It did not seem surprising to Desmond that on a clear, sunny morning a lake would be so tempestuous. In his presence, all lakes were controlled by the splashers, and he had never seen one calm and reflective. The Duke closed the shade, yawned, gobbled several aspirin to soothe his toothache, scratched his left armpit, and tossed his thick, dirt-encrusted hair from one side to the other. His manservant, poised as he had been for hours on a narrow, straight-backed seat, leaned forward to fluff the Duke's pillows and murmured his usual greeting. "How fine you look this morning, sir!" The lengthy procession moved along on the rutted road. As it passed the lake, the splashers quickly redonned their robes and trotted back into their marching place. The front attendants continued to scan the landscape vigilantly for anything that might be reflective, and at the very end, a uniformed man, especially chosen for his sure-footedness, marched very carefully, alert for any rock or hole that might cause him to stumble. He carried a bamboo cage that contained a very rare, very valuable butterfly. It would be the Duke's gift, the gift that would amaze and delight the king, that would persuade the Princess Patricia Priscilla to choose him of all the suitors, and would make her the Duke of Dyspepsia's bride. From the west, a similarly long and complicated procession moved forward from the domain of Pustula. There were the decorated horses, of course, that consumed courtiers, and the elaborate coach that carried Prince Percival and his valet. There was also a large brass band trained to form themselves, while marching and playing, into the shape of one large letter P, or alternatively into 4 small P's, intended to represent the bride and groom-to-be. In addition, trudging at the end of the line, a large number of servants was carrying trunks of the princess's clothing, boxes of ointments, jars of perfumes, and tubes of hair dyes and pomades, as well as whisk brooms to resupply the valet from time to time when his dandruff brushes became clogged and had to be destroyed. Finally, surrounding the entire entourage, walking with precision, were 100 mirror-bearers. They walked sideways like crabs, an art they practiced back in the domain when the prince was not traveling, so that any given moment, if the prince looked from the window of his carriage, he would not see scenery, not see lakes or hills or meadows, though they were traveling through such a landscape, but instead would behold with satisfaction the thing he most admired himself. Inside the carriage, at his side, so that he could stroke it now and then, following which he curtly ordered to the valet to wipe it free of his oily fingerprints, sat a small rectangular silver box with a lid that was snapped closed and latched. The box contained his engagement gift to the princess, the specially made gift that he knew would persuade her to agree to be his wife. The procession of the Conjoint counts was moving down from the north at the time, but seen from the hawk's point of view from above, it was a hard, sharp contrast to the steady and orderly lines that came from the east and the west. The third group, equally large, moved in fits and starts, in zigs and zags. It was because it had 2 leaders, and they couldn't agree. "Take that detour, there to the left," Count Colin had bellowed, leaning from the left-hand window of the double-wide carriage in which he rode with his twin brother. "No, stupid, go to the right," Count Cuthbert shouted, and dragged his brother across the slippery leather seat of the carriage so that he could put his head through the window on the right and point. In retaliation for being dragged, Colin yanked his brother's beard as hard as he could. Cuthbert turned and slapped him, then grabbed one of his brother's earlobes and twisted. The carriage lurched and jiggled as they fought, kicking and bickering, and the entire procession once again, as it had throughout the day, slowed to a halt because the drivers did not know whether to go left or right. "Sirs," a polite knock at the carriage door interrupted the fight, and the convoy leader, an army general in full uniform, expressed his concern to the counts. We're losing time because of all the stoppings and startings, and I fear we will arrive late for the balls if we don't move more steadily along." They have to say everything in plural, so ball is balls. "It's his fault," Colin said, gesturing to his brother. "He caused all the poppings and fartings." He laughed raucously and poked Cuthbert with an elbow. "Get it? Get it?" Cuthbert poked him back and giggled. "Poppings and fartings," he repeated with glee. The general waited patiently. "May I suggest, sirs, that in order to proceed at a good paces, we rely on the maps readers?" I believe they had studied the routes carefully. "We have entire troops of geography experts." "Entire poops?" Colin chortled. "What do you think, Cuth? Shall we let the poops lead us with their stoopy-poopy maps?" Count Cuthbert put his tongue between his lips and made a rude noise at the general. Count Colin turned, pulled down his trousers, and mooned the general. Then they both leaned back in their seat and began to pick their noses. "Get moving!" Count Cuthbert called loudly to the carriage driver. "Me and Colin want to get married." The hawk, watching as the convoys advanced, sensed what was coming. They would converge, he could see, at the castle, and no good would come of it, no good at all. He screeched and wheeled about in the cloudless sky, wanting nothing to do with humans, and especially these. He tested the wind, then turned and flew full speed toward the southwest, deciding to soar today over a distant city instead, where he would find rats, a much more reliable species. You always knew exactly where you stood with a rat, and they were edible as well. All right, Chapter 15, Preparations. An entire room beside the banquet hall had been designated the gift room and was filled now with the wrapped and ribboned gifts that the princess would distribute to the villagers during dinner before the toasts were made. There were dolls and balls and kites and games for all the village children, and for those who attended school a shiny sharp pencil as well. There were flowered aprons for the village housewives, each with a small bottle of perfume in the pocket. For the village men, most of them farmers, bright-colored handkerchiefs and combs. Special gifts had been chosen by the princess for special people. For Tess, her chambermaid, her own copy of Alice in Wonderland with illustrations. For the schoolmaster, a leather-bound book of maps in which she had inscribed, for Herr Gutman with thanks from Patricia Priscilla, who was Pat for too short a time. An engraved silver pitch pipe for the trio of singing serving girls, who would tonight perform the song that they had prepared for the birthday. For the pulley boy, a fine pair of gloves to protect his hands against the thick rope, and finally, for the little orphan who wanted something to cuddle, a small pink ribbon basket containing a satin cushion with a note attached that read, "Coming soon, one delicious kitten." Upstairs that morning upon awakening, the princess had looked around, as usual, for her cat. A loud purr and some tiny squeaking sounds directed her attention to a far corner of the bedchamber, where she saw Delicious lying haughtily upon a pillow that had been dragged from a chair. The cat was licking and tending 3 tiny yellow kittens. "I should have known," the princess cried. "The size of your tummy was suspicious, Delicious." "Delicious is pregnant. She had kittens. Oh. The sun was just beginning to set over the domain. Outside on the castle grounds, scores of tents had been set up for the visitors who had traveled along long distances. Beyond the vegetable gardens, spreading down toward the King's Fishing Creek, were the red-striped tents that housed Duke Desmond and his many courtiers. It had been an unfortunate choice of location, for the splashers, already exhausted when they arrived, were immediately called into service once again. Now they took turns, going in groups of 10 at a time, dashing to the creek to stir up the usually quiet waters. On another side of the castle grounds, beside the meadow where wildflowers attracted hundreds of bees that lived in nearby hives and provided the honey for the queen's breakfast, green polka-dotted tents provided shelter for Prince Percival and his entourage. It too had been a poor choice for the row of tents, when surrounded by the mirror bearers blocked the beeline to the meadow, which confused the bees dreadfully and was beginning to make them so angry that a sinister and alarming buzz was becoming quite audible. Finally, behind the counting house and west tower, a double-wide blue and white check tent had been erected for the conjoint counts, and around it similar but smaller blue and white tents for their mini-servers and carriers. But the large tent had already partially collapsed because of the wrestling match between Colin and Cuthbert that had ensued shortly after their arrival, when one wanted the bed pillows arranged to the east and the other to the west. Colin got Cuthbert in a hammerlock, but Cuthbert dug his fingernails into Colin's backside, and within moments they had destroyed the furniture and splintered one of the side tent poles. "Oh, miss, you do look so lovely and grown up." Tess, the chambermaid, had just finished pinning up the princess's hair. Ordinarily it fell in curls over her shoulders, but tonight, for the first time, she would wear it on top of her head, framed by a small tiara of pearls and aquamarines that just matched her eyes. "Well, Tess, I'm 16 today," the princess sighed and leaned forward toward the looking glass to fasten earrings that matched the tiara. 16 is grown up. She stared at herself a bit and bit her lip. "Old enough to marry," she added in a small voice. "Blimey," the chambermaid said. For a moment they were both silent. "Oh, Tess," the princess wiped away a small tear that had formed in the corner of her eye. "I did so love going to school, and the schoolmaster said he could help me to become a teacher." "Why don't you then, miss? That would be such a great thing for you. I've been thinking about wanting to become a teacher myself, miss, someday. I tried teaching the pulley boys letters, and he took it right away." "The law of the domain," the princess said sadly. "Law of the domain? Whatever's that, miss?" It's the law, Tess. It says the heiress, that's me, has to marry at 16 and produce an heir or another heiress." "An heir? Well, that's foolish, miss, to think you can produce an heir," and she's talking about the air in the sky. "The sky does that, or the heavens maybe. Something up there anyways." The chambermaid went to the window and looked out. "Just see, the leaves are moving round. There's plenty of air." "No, an heir, Tess. Not the same thing. It means the princess fell silent. "A what then?" "A baby," the princess said in a small voice. Tess looked outraged. "A baby? No way! Not now, miss. Not when you're 16 and wanting to be a teacher. Maybe later, miss, but not now." The chambermaid paced angrily back and forth across the bedchamber. The princess stood up and her embroidered petticoat swirled around her. "Put yourself together, Tess. It makes me fretful when you pace," she said with resignation. "It is the law of the domain, and it is my 16th birthday. Help me with my gown." The chambermaid stamped her foot. "But blimey, miss, it's a bad law. Can't somebody change it?" "Only the king, my father." Tess stood still. "A pa can be hard," she said. "Mine was. Threw me right out of the house, he did. Told me not to come back. My father's not cruel like that. He's a good ruler, I think. We haven't gone to war in years because he doesn't believe in it." The princess gestured to the silvery blue gown that was laid out carefully on her bed. "He never raises taxes," she went on, "and he outlawed hangings. Get the gown, Tess." Tess carefully picked up the elaborate gown and lowered it over the princess, taking care not to muss the elegantly upswept hair. With her voice muffled by the heavy folds of the skirt, the princess continued. "He holds celebrations and parades and invites traveling circuses. Last year he built a What's that, miss?" The chambermaid eased the gown down so that the head of the princess emerged. "Hospital. He had a hospital built because he learned that the villagers had none. Do you remember when Cook chopped her hand, Tess, when she was aiming for a turkey? It was the hospital stitched her up so nicely." "So they did, miss. Hardly a scar." The chambermaid began to button, one by one, the long line of pearl buttons on the back of the gown. "He's a good king," the princess said again. "Yes, he is, miss. Hold still. He loves me dearly. Don't squirm. I can't button when you squirm, miss. He only wants the best for me." The chambermaid stopped buttoning and stood back indignantly with her hands on her hips. "Well then, miss," she said in a loud voice, "all I got to say is he has an odd way of showing it if and he ain't wants you to have an heir when you're still nothing but a girl. I know he don't beat you like my pa did or throw you out, but if and he was a really good king, he would change the law of the domain, and that's all I got to say, miss." A small golden clock on the dressing table chimed. "Button, Tess. It's almost time." And as for them suitors, miss, well, we haven't talked about them suitors, but I seen them, miss, and when they arrived, one is the ugliest man in the world, miss, with teeth that stick out and a huge snarl of dirty hair all ratted up. And the next one, miss, well, the next one don't do nothing but strut and look at himself every minute, and his hair is sleeked back with foul-smelling oil. And the last one, miss, blimey, the last one is two stuck together, slapping at each other and spitting and using the coarsest language. Tess, don't talk about them. I can't bear it. But, miss, they say you have to choose tonight. They say below stairs that at the ball you have to choose, and I don't see how you can when the choice be so horrible. The princess took a deep breath and drew up her shoulders. Tess, be still and button my gown. That is a command. The chambermaid sniffed. Her freckled face was pink with outrage. Yes, miss, she said and curtsied. Oh, lots of things are happening now in the story. I am really loving this story. I think that Patricia and Tess have really become good friends because you can see that now Tess is a lot more open with her. She feels that she can really say anything. She can be honest about what she thinks about the suitors, and you know, she also wants what's best for the princess now because they're friends, you know. And so I think that Patricia, I think she has a plan. My prediction is that she has some kind of plan on how to deal with the fact that she has to choose from these unfortunate choices in suitors. And it's kind of funny that her kids in her class, the kids in her class, all wanted there to be a circus, or well, the one girl really wanted there to be a circus really bad. And it turns out that the suitors who are coming to the birthday ball have set up colorful tents. And what do we see at circuses? Well, usually we see big colorful tents. And so I think that's kind of funny, and I have a feeling that the kids in her class, the peasant kids, they're really going to love this ball. And I think it's so sweet that Patricia has bought presents for everybody. So you can see how selfless she is. She's not selfish because she doesn't just care about herself. She's thinking about everybody else right now. So again, she's not one of those princesses who are into material things and all about herself and getting a husband and all that. You know, she's different. She cares about everybody. So it's funny. And her cat, Delicious, had kittens, so that was so sweet. So some interesting new things are unfolding in the story, and we're getting really close. We're almost done. We are going to finish the rest of the book next week. So stay tuned for that. Everybody have an awesome weekend, and I will see you all next Friday.